here and very interested in your testimony. Just anecdotally, I think one thing that we haven't touched on that certainly every state is experiencing, and that is the downturn in state revenue shortages when it comes to fuel tax or DMV fuel fees and other things. And then the expenditures that our state DOTs have had to take on in terms of making sure highway workers are safe. And as you know, that's a lot of times those are the biggest departments that are biggest employers of a state besides the Department of Education. So like for instance, West Virginia, our revenue on our motor fuel has been down 37%. So one of my questions, think about this as I ask my first question, and my real question, my last question is going to be, if I can get to it, is as you look over the next 3 months, I know it's hard to predict, but are you looking for upturns, downturns, assuming that we can still remain in our opening mode? So that's going to be the last question I ask. And I also want to put a plug in for the highway bill. I understand the chairman has already spoken to that. That is something that came through my subcommittee over on EPW and is going to come through this committee as well. But there's going to be an issue with this match from our state governments to be able to move forward with this. Mr. Bozzella, I wanted to ask you, because I talked with the manufacturer of automobiles just yesterday, and they're fully open and they're producing, and they say their sales are really pretty good. But one of the things they're concerned about is the supply chain, a different aspect of it than what Senator Rosen was talking about, and that is that they employ more than 500 people, and yet they've had this downturn, and they don't have the capital to really provide the supplies for these manufacturers that they start really expanding their manufacturing growth. Have you experienced that or heard that in the industry, and what might you suggest?
Very much so, Senator. This is a big concern, and I think it's a potential real challenge for a successful and safe restart to the industry. Two-thirds of automotive employment is in the supplier sector is small and medium-sized businesses, right, and they are not sufficiently capitalized right now. So I think a focus on liquidity for small and medium-sized suppliers is really critical here. If we happen to your last question, have a bit of an uptick and then a downturn, and then we're forced to slow production or stop production again, this could be catastrophic for suppliers. So I do think this focus on liquidity is going to be important for suppliers.
Thank you. Mr. Jeffries, do you have a response to my last question? Because it doesn't look like I'm going to have much more time for anything.
The final question,
the question being, if you look over the 3 months, you're hearing that we think it's really bad now, but it's going to get worse. Is it or not?
Right.
What is your projection?
So at our what I hope is the trough of rail traffic was about 25% year-over-year decrease. Based on our weekly reports, we've started seeing that number improve slightly. There's not going to be a dramatic spike, but for example, given the number of autos and auto parts we move, we were at a 90% traffic decrease in auto parts. We're now at about a 60%. So we've seen that number come up, and that's coming up in other areas as China opens up and we have containers coming through the ports. Intermodal should continue to start to increase. So I think I'm definitely not going to call them green shoots, but I think we are cautiously optimistic about that gradual increase.
Okay, good. Mr. Ollier, I do want to ask you that question, but I have a quick question too with the EPA's release of their final rule on the implementation of the 401 Clean Water Act, where certain states have been overshooting their authorities, as I believe, and that's certainly impacted pipelines. Can you give, from your perspective, how the EPA's final rule will help your members?
Thank you, Senator. Yeah, we support the final rule. We were pleased to see it finalized. From our standpoint, the investments that we make, we've had a lot of discussions about infrastructure. The investments that our members are making are many times, billion-dollar plus investments. And so for us, what's critically important is a timely and predictable permitting process. And I think one of the things that we're seeing with this particular permit that you're referencing was some agencies were delaying the permit longer than they would be allowed to under the statute, what the statute calls for. Some agencies were being expansive in terms of how they would apply that particular permit and not really focus on the relatively narrow issues that it's supposed to be around. So we welcome the rulemaking. We welcome environmental permitting. We're confident that we can construct pipelines in an environmentally safe manner, but we're looking for that predictability.
Senator, if I can
Mr.
just
Wilson,
add.
you want to talk about the future?
Oh,
Go ahead, Mr. Wilson.
The future, certainly. I mean, demand for transportation services largely persisted in our industry. There has, of course, been some softening in the energy markets. I think you've probably seen that in your home state.
Yes, I have.
Perhaps a little bit longer from than 3 months out. We're hopeful that the economy can really ramp up to where it was, and our job is to move energy to people who need it. And so as the economy grows, that demand for energy will come back, and you'll see us respond.
Thank you. I think my time's up.
Thank you, Senator